at the very beginning of August. I just want to highlight that there are going to be 19 MVPs speaking. So you're going to learn from some of the best, Sitecore experts in the world from all over the world who are coming in to present for you guys. We have like some fun-filled and really great sessions, from like all kinds of different topics. I can't remember them all, but there's a huge, I would say broad, diverse amount of topics being spoken about from some of the, bleeding edge stuff in the Sitecore world. I want to let you know that we have an early bird rate running at the moment. I think it's going on probably until the end of June, actually, if that's correct. You definitely don't want to miss this. It's limited seating. Grab your tickets now. You don't want to miss out on this. And also get to network with some of your colleagues and then people out in the Sitecore world. Not only from India but from all around the world. So, guys, grab the opportunity now before it's too late. Actually, you're on mute.
Oh, you're right. Anyways, I was talking on mute. So so if you haven't attended the one before in February, the purpose of this training, which we'll go into, we did that in February. There was a lot of traveling and a lot of things we were doing, so we couldn't schedule one early enough. So it's May, but we're planning on scheduling the future ones like a little bit closer, like a month each or closer than that. The purpose of this training is very simple. So we out here when we're doing Sitecore implementations, we are getting implementation code back from offshore, whether it be in India or Southeast Asia or South America. And you can clearly tell that there's a difference in understanding of Sitecore. And what we found is that it is, the regular .NET developers are being thrown into doing Sitecore with little to no training, and it's affecting obviously their knowledge and how they do it, and they grab things from blogs or videos and try to do it. Our goal is purely simply just to give our knowledge and whichever experts we could find, their knowledge to all the people who are willing to learn and then use those practices so that you build better implementations and we could have a better Sitecore cycle. All right, hold on. All right, so like this slide says, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So one does not simply master Sitecore. What that means is, I've been doing Sitecore for 9 years, so has Mike. We still have tons to learn. It's not that you can learn everything and be a master at everything. You learn as you go. It all truly depends on the thirst of how much you want to do it. If you want to sit there, decompile Sitecore kernel and go crazy, good for you. You'll learn a lot more things, so don't expect to be an expert in one day or 1 week. You still learn as you keep going, and with the new versions coming in, there's always new things to do. All right, so this is one of my favorite slides. Again, this was in the last webinar too, but we are tired of listening to it worked fine on my machine. I don't know why it's not working on the dev server or the QA server. It's truly not. Excuses are really not the right way to go forward. There are resources out there for you to research and in Google, Stack Overflow, to find things which will help you fix issues rather than just handing it out to the next guy, pass the buck, as they say. So try your best to not give excuses when your code doesn't work. All right. So the overview for today we went over the Sitecore admin console last time, so we can go through it again, just a brief overview. And we're going to talk about fields. So as we saw last time, we talked about a general overview of Sitecore. Let me just open this real quick. All right, let me get this guy over here. All right, so we looked last time at Sitecore, and we looked at what constitutes a Sitecore admin. We looked at several aspects of the Sitecore admin. So this is the content editor, and again, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but essentially what we focused on was what is a template, and how the data templates let you build what kind of data you need, and the actual content goes based on the templates. So when you look at that, each template consists of multiple fields, and today we'll be talking about the different types of fields you have access to. Obviously, we will not be able to go through every single one of these, but we picked a couple from each of the sections which we thought were the most basic and the right ones to look at, and that's what we would be going through today. Mike, do you want to take it? I'm going to change it to you right now. So the first part, many windows. So the first part we'll be looking at, which we did, is the Sitecore admin, is we talk about fields, and Mike's going to take this over and he's going to talk about fields.
Fields everywhere.
That's right.
All right, so we're going to talk about the simple field types. We're not going to talk about all of them. There's a lot. Let's show my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right, cool. All right, so we're going to talk about, simple field types. Not going to talk about all of them, maybe 4 of them. We're going to start off with the most basic field in Sitecore, and that's the single line text field. So here's an example of what it looks like. It's just a text box, and it obviously just contains text. In your template, you would just basically select single line text from the drop-down for the type. It's as simple as it gets. I gotta hide these controls. One second. You guys can still see it because the control thing's in the way. Just gonna do this a little bit. All right, so how does this thing work? Well, basically just everything in Sitecore. So every field in Sitecore basically gets saved as a string. And since this is basically the most simplest field because this is just a string. So I wrote some code. I will want to kind of demo some code of how you can actually grab this data out of Sitecore, display it, and also modify it. So I'm basically going to show, like right now, how to display it. There really isn't much that you have to do, for, let's say, Sitecore MVC, or even if you're on web forms. It's basically, I have a simple view rendering. So this is actually just a Razor MVC file. I have no code for it. All I have is really this HTML helper that comes out of the box with Sitecore, and it's obviously called field, and you pass the name of the field, and then it's going to use the context item or data source or whatever's set on your view rendering at that time. And so let's run this and see what happens. So I set up some dummy pages here that map all of these view renderings or controller renderings, which I'll get to later on. And I'm just going to use preview mode. So hopefully we'll see this display. And there we go. We see it right there. So that's great. So how do we change this? So basically, we can't just display data all day long. We also have to add data and manipulate it and things like that. So I wrote a controller rendering for this with an action to modify it. So basically, I'm grabbing the current item, which is the page item that we're on. And then in the Sitecore API has a bunch of fields defined in it. I'm going to pull this up real quickly. So everything's in the Sitecore.data.fields namespace inside of Sitecore.kernel. These are all the different helper classes that really wrap these fields. Not everything's there for every field, but there is a lot of stuff in here that will help you. Right now, I'm just going to use this text field class, or an instance of it. Basically, This right here will grab that field instance, and it's really a type called field, but there's an implicit operator to convert it over to this instance right here. One thing you always want to do is make sure it's not null, because let's say, there was no type defined for it, or you're mapping the wrong thing. So let's say we're grabbing the wrong field and it's not a text field value. This will be null. So you always want to check for nulls. I'm wrapping this in a security disabler to shut off the security model in Sitecore. So basically there are permissions set up on items, and you have to shut that off in order to edit values on it. And once we're ready, we have to put the item in editing mode. And it's simple as this. You just set the value property on the actual text field instance for this. And then you take it out of editing mode. And all I'm doing is I'm just calling the Razor file, passing that off to have it render. So let's do that. So hopefully this gets changed to blah, 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 blah. We do that. We see blah, 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 blah. And if I refresh this, it was updated in Sitecore. So that's basically a single line text field. Now the next one, which is kind of similar but a little bit different, is the rich text field. So this is just like a WYSIWYG editor like Microsoft Word. You have the ability to, there are different out-of-the-box profiles that will give you a different set of buttons up here. I'm using the full editor profile that gives you pretty much all the buttons and all the drop-downs and all that good stuff. You can go in here, start typing things, blah, 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 So basically behind the scenes, it's just a string. It's really a multi-field text box, which is another simple type in Sitecore, but it just holds HTML. That's all it does. Nothing magical here. And then, we have a nice field, content editor field to render this and make it look pretty, and you can do things with it. This, I can just use the same, I created, a duplicate Razor file, but really it's the same thing as the last one. Basically, we're just using the field helper that's out of Sitecore MVC, and it's going to use the context item, which is the current page that we're going to display, and then it's going to render the value in this field right here. So let's do that. So I'm going to do preview, and there we go. We have the HTML being rendered. Everything's wonderful. Now, what if we want to modify this? So I have the same thing in here on different field on a different item. All right, so I created a controller rendering. Well, we have a controller rendering for it already, but I have an action for it. Modify. It really is the same code that you saw in the last one. Really, everything, underlying for all the fields, everything's saved in this value property. You can also, this is I would say an accessor, a mutator, for the fancy word for getter and setter, or setter and getter. Basically, you could just set it. Of course, you have to put the item in editing mode and shut off the security, and then boom, magically it should just appear. This is like duplicated code from the last action. So let's do that. And you can see I'm going to have wonderful marquee HTML in here. If you guys aren't familiar with that, well, you're about to see some animation. So let's run this guy. There we go. It looks like we did something. You see hi coming across the screen. And if I refresh this guy, then we see it coming through the rich text field. So that's basically the next simplest field. We also have an image field, which basically just, you can set an image from the media library in Sitecore on it. You do browse, and you can, use this nice speak dialog to select your image, what's recently uploaded, my images. Looks like I'm not finding anything, but anyways, you can select this. Actually, I probably have to clear it out in order to see everything. But I have an image set here. Now for this, same thing. To view it, I only need a view rendering in Sitecore MVC for it. I'm using almost the exact same code, just the name of the field is different. And to see that in action, we just do the same thing, and then Sitecore behind the scenes will render this for you as an image tag with properties on it if everything's set inside of Sitecore properly. Now, let's change it. So we have oh, look at this, we have a different image. So we want to change this to something else. So I created, a controller for it with an action. So I cheated. I basically grabbed this from an image. This is an ID on an image, a media library image item in the media library. Grabbing the current item. I'm grabbing the image field that's going to hold this thing. Make sure the image field isn't null. Turn off security, edit the item, and then I'm going to set the media ID for that image field, and then magically behind the scenes everything gets saved after end edit is called. And then I'm just going to call the same razor view so that I can see it. So let's do that. Ah, look at that. We have a different image. I like this image. Anyways, if I go back to Sitecore and refresh, we see that the new image is saved in there. And we have another simple type called checkbox. It's exactly what you think it is. It's a checkbox. I can check it on and off, do that. Basically, behind the scenes, the way Sitecore works is that you might think it's true or false. It really isn't. It's actually a 1 or a 0 if you look at the value. So here we have 1, and then if I unchecked it, it would be 0. Now, one thing that I want to say is if you have no value defined on it initially, it's going to be empty. So it's almost like a tri-state, 1, 0, or nothing. But it really isn't, because the checkbox field class, which I'm going to show for modifying it, takes care of all that for you. So if I go here, we see that this guy's checked. I have a controller for it, checkbox controller with an action. And then we also have another class that will wrap the checkbox field. Basically, we have to, obviously we have to check that it's not null, and then, do this and do that. Now to set it, you would pass in a Boolean value on the check property. You could do it true or false. You can't pass in nothing because this is a Boolean right here. And then once we're done, we just take it out of editing mode and just return it. Over in the front end, just like the last 2 or 3 I showed you, I'm just letting Sitecore take care of this. Now, you're going to see something interesting about this. You're not going to see what you think you're going to see, or maybe you will. So let's take a look and see what that looks like if I look, preview it. Aha! It's not a false. Some people may think that would have rendered false if it were turned off because we turned it off, but no, it renders 0. Why? Well, behind the scenes, there's no field renderer for this. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but there's nothing really rendering it, so it's grabbing the value by default, which is 0. And it's just going to display it as is. So not every field in Sitecore has a renderer for it. Many do, but not all. So that's I wanted to show that. So if we go back to Sitecore and we do a refresh on this guy, he's unchecked. And if we look over the raw values, it's 0. Sorry, I clicked that too fast. So that covers the simple field types I wanted to talk about. There are so many others, as Ashley said and pointed out, that we probably could take days or maybe hours showing all this stuff. So, there are other things like date and date time. So date obviously would store a date, and date time would store, date in a time. And then this is actually not a field in Sitecore, and I wrote about this. I extended the content editor and created my own field, but we're not going to talk about that right now. And then there are, other ones. Giphy is not one of those. It's another customization that I built. But then there are other things like integer, which are really just a single-line text field, but, it checks to see if the value inside of it's an integer and things like that. Multi-line is basically, a big multi-area inside of the content editor, kind of like what the rich text field looked like when I toggled over to the raw values view. Number will hold a number that's not just an integer, but I guess any number, floating point number. Password field, so if you type a password in there, you're going to see a bunch of asterisks or something. And then there are other things, Word document. You can drop a Word document in here, but we're not going to cover those right now. So I'm going to jump over to link field types. Close this. So link field types, I probably should go over to the link field types and show you those. So we have something called the drop link. So before I jump into the drop link, I want to probably cover the different types of link fields in here. So drop link, drop tree, I'm going to show you these guys as well as general link. But then we also have general link with search, which leverages the content search framework inside of Sitecore, which came out on Sitecore 7.2. By the way, I'm on Sitecore 8.1 update 2. So if you're on an older version of Sitecore, you may not see certain things and it wouldn't look this fancy. But anyways. And then there are other things in here we're not going to discuss. So let's jump back to the drop link field. So a drop link field is not what you think. It's not like a drop down with a bunch of links in it. It's a drop down with a bunch of stuff in it. So what is this? So it looks like just a drop down, right? But per se this guy, if I look at the raw values of it, we see a GUID or an item ID. So that's what's going on behind the scenes. It's saving the item ID of the item that was selected in here. And yes, these are items. So if I go back here quickly, I just want to cover this. In the source field over here, you can point to a Sitecore item or folder that contains other items underneath it. And that folder will be the data source for this particular field that will show up as in the drop-down for you to select from. You basically could just put a bunch of stuff in there. I'm not sure if this, and this field may also support queries, but I don't remember. We're going to talk about queries later on in this presentation, but there are certain fields that allow for queries and others that don't. I don't remember if this one does. I don't think it does, but don't quote me on that. I'm going to close this. So what does this guy do? Well, there's no renderer for this guy, so I created a controller to handle the drop link field. So we're going to jump over to that. Close this, put this open. All right, so this particular file has a bunch of stuff going on in it. So I have a action to read from it. So I'm grabbing the current item, and I'm grabbing the drop link, but I'm using this thing called lookup field. And this, I remember using this thing back on Sitecore 5.2. It's been around forever. This will wrap, drop links and other classes that will hold GUIDs or item IDs in their field values. On it, you basically have the ability to grab the item that's in it. So I'm just going to do this quickly to show you this. Oops, sorry. Over here, I'm going to do this over here where it's defined. I can grab the item from it like that. So you can grab the item, you can grab the item ID like this. And you also have the ability to set the value on it, rawly if you wanted to. Or you can basically just set it, to be, you can actually update this guy, because, no, actually you can't. So I guess you have to use the value property on this guy. I thought that had setters on those properties, but I was wrong. Anyways, you would set it that way through value, but anyways, let's look at read. So what am I doing here? I'm grabbing this guy and I'm passing the target ID to this method called get skinny items. Now skinny item is just a model I created. It has 3 properties on it: ID, name, and path. And I'm just grabbing the item ID, making it a string because this is a string, setting the name of the item, and then setting its full path. Up here, I'm doing some, I'm dotting my I's and crossing my T's to make sure things aren't null and things exist in the database. This method here basically just grabs the item from the master database. I do want to say I don't recommend ever doing this in any of your code, ever. I'm doing that just for pedagogical reasons. I need a way to grab this stuff quickly. Never, ever call things directly from the master database unless you have a good reason for it. Anyways, back to creating this skinny item. So we basically create it, we return it. Otherwise, if there's an exception, we log it. That's another thing I want to say is log your exceptions. Put things in try catches when you don't know if things exist inside of the database. This will help you later on, and your business people and your content authors will love you. You don't want things exploding and causing yellow screens of death inside of Sitecore, ever. Anyways, I digress. So if we go back to the read, he's basically just returning that model and passing it off to this razor view. And let's have a look and see what that looks like. So we have this guy here. I'm going to actually go view him. This is what the raw value looks like. I probably should have showed you the razor file. I'll show it afterwards. And then this is what the values were on the skinny item model. So just, just to show you that this isn't smoke and mirrors, I'll show you what that razor view looks like. And I'm going to go to drop link. Make sure if the model's no, if it's null, get out. Otherwise, we're just going to pass it off to the field HTML helper from Sitecore MVC. There is no renderer for the drop link, so it will just show you the raw field values. And then here, I'm using the properties on my model and just displaying it via HTML to highlight stuff, which shows you this. All right, that's great. How do we modify the stuff in here? Well, as I mentioned, you can set it on the value property of your drop link. Here I'm doing, I'm buttoning up my jacket, making sure things are here. You can also do a .clear, which will clear out the field. So if you wanted to actually set something here, you could do like some kind of GUID here, blah, 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 blah. Or you could do clear to clear it out. And that's what I do within the editing code for the item. And then this down here is just basically passing it off to that get skinny item just to do a refresh and then send it back to this particular razor view. So let's go look at that and see what it does. Shows nothing because we cleared it out. So yeah, and if I go back here into Sitecore, well, it's cleared out. So that's the drop link field in a nutshell. We also have the drop tree field. It's another link type. Why is it a link type? Well, you can go select stuff in here. So I can select this guy, or I can go select home, or I can select whatever I want, even that. I'm going to go put this back to something more meaningful. I'll do that. Save it. Now behind the scenes, it's just storing a item ID inside. So if we go over to the controller for this in the action, it's exactly the same code as the last code file I showed you for the drop link. We're using lookup field, and I'm using the skinny items just to show you that, hey, this stuff does exist and I can render it. Same thing with the modify. I'm not going to go over this again. This is basically the same code from the last one. I'm basically just setting a value as I showed in the last one, which I didn't really show. I did a .clear, but I'm basically setting this guy here to be a GUID, which is here. This is an item ID to my home item inside of Sitecore, which is this guy right here. That's that value. So let's first do a read, and then let's do a modify and see what happens. So if I go over here and I do a preview, here's the raw field value, which is the item ID that was saved, and here's the item that represents it. Maybe that is another sub-item. He was what was selected. Here's his path. If I go over here to modify, same now we're selecting our home item as I showed you in here. So we're using this home item GUID right here. We saved it to the field, and now we see it on the front end. And if I go over here, I see that it was selected in the drop tree. So for front-end stuff, it's exactly the same thing as the last one. I just did a copy and paste job here because really, we're just passing off a skinny item and we're just showing the raw field value at the top. All right, let's go back. General link. So this is another link type. Now this makes sense because it's a general link field. What is a general link field? Well, it's a field that holds links. Not just, links to things inside of Sitecore, so like a page item, but you can insert external links. So if I click that, I get a nice dialog where I can set a URL to something that lives outside of my Sitecore instance. Link description is going to be your link text that's going to be rendered on the front end. And then here I can set whether I want it to open in the same browser window or a new browser window. Custom, I didn't actually never check that off. I think you can do custom things with it, which I've never done. And then you can even put CSS classes in here and other things, which I'm not going to do. So I'm going to get out of here. I'm not going to change anything. I'm going to just, let me show you what the code looks like over in the front end. I have no controller action for read because it's Sitecore will take care of it for you, which is awesome. I'm just using the same field HTML helper method right here. Passing off the name of the field, and then behind the scenes it's going to use the context item that we're looking at. So if I go over here and I do a read, there we go. That's a link. See, it's underlined when I hover over it. Let me move this up a little bit. So you can see, I don't know if you guys can see the URL at all. I'll just look at this. So you look at that. It's an H tag with an href, target underscore blank to open a new window. There's the link text. I can even click it in here and I'll go there. So let's talk about modify quickly. So modify, I had to create a controller in an action for it. So here I'm grabbing the context item. The link field class inside of Sitecore.data.fields is what you'd use for this. It has all kinds of useful properties on it. You can grab, the let me show you that. So if I go over here, you can do, if you needed to ever grab this stuff from code, which you probably shouldn't have to ever, you should use the field HTML helper. I mean, you can grab the link text, a title for a tooltip. You can, the target, which is, you could be underscore blank or, or empty or whatever it would be. Target, if it's an internal link, target ID and target item would be populated because the target item would be a reference to the item that exists in the content tree. Target item ID would be its ID. Title would be the title that's saved in Sitecore for the tooltip. Text, link text, and then there's other helpful things in here. Link type is a string that tells you what type of link it is. So it could be a value of internal, media, external. There's a few others, JavaScript, things like that. I'm not going to go into that. But here what we're doing is we're making sure it's not null, shutting off security, putting the item in editing mode. I'm clearing out the target. I'm clearing out the URL. So URL here is for external URLs or things that are not internal URLs. So it could be a JavaScript link or an anchor link or things like that. I'm setting the link type to be internal, the link text to be that, microlink, and then I'm actually going to give it an item ID for the item I want it to point to, which is my home page, which I have set up here. I don't ever recommend doing this, but you get the picture. You can set an item ID on here. And then we take it out of editing mode and then magically it's saved. And then over here I'm just going to call up the razor view so I can view what happened. So if I go over to Sitecore real quickly, one thing I want to show you before I actually run this is behind the scenes, this is just XML. So this is an XML field. Sitecore has a lot of XML fields. So basically you can store different data for a field, with what's selected by the user. And then there's code behind the scenes to parse this XML, get the values out, populate some class instances in their properties with values to come from these XML strings. So I'm going to actually run this guy. There we go, my cool link. If I actually look at the A tag, it's pointing to my home page, which is just /, and that's it. We have no target property, we have nothing else. I can even click on this. That'll bring me right to my home page. It's loading. Hey, look at that, my home page. So if we go back to here, we see that home is selected. And if I look at the raw values, we see some different attributes on this XML. So here, it's pointing to the item ID. It's looking at target's empty because we nullified it. And then we have a new link text, and anchor's nullified because we never set it. Same, URL is also empty because we got rid of it. And now the link type is internal for the internal link, which points to an item inside of the Sitecore content tree. So that covers the link fields I wanted to talk about today. We're going to move on to list fields, which are, well, obviously fields that really you can pick from lists. So let's talk about the drop list field. You're going to be like, well, Mike, that's just another drop-down. And why do we have two drop-downs in here? Well, the difference between this and the other one, which is drop link, is that this guy stores the actual value. So this is the raw value that is saved inside of the drop list field. Just like the drop link field, we can actually have it point to a folder that will contain items we want to show up in the dropdown in the source field here. So let's have a look at the read. So there's really no renderer for this, but I decided to just use the basic field HTML helper in Sitecore MVC for this because it will just spit out the raw value, which is cool. So this is basically all it is. I set up a view rendering for this. I have no controller action. I don't have to do anything but display the value that's in the field. So if we go over here and run this guy, that's what we get. We get what was selected in the dropdown that's saved in the field. Now for modify, I did create a controller for this with an action because we have to do that in order to set things in code. Let me close this, open this guy up, drop list. So we have a modify action. We're grabbing the current item. Now we're using something called a value lookup field, which is different than the lookup field. Now this guy, he's kind of like the lookup field except he has less stuff on him. I mean, there's all kinds of like utility methods here you could use if you wanted to. Some of these you might have to use, you might not. But really, there's nothing else. You can do a clear, you can remove the value that's from it. But really, if you want to set the value on it, you have to use the value property. Just like the last one, actually. So here I'm going to put in a string that does not exist in the dropdown. Of course, I got to put the item in editing mode and then take it out when I'm done. And then I just pass over, things back over to the Razor file. If I go over to Sitecore, let's run this guy and see what happens. See, look at that. That's the value that we had in code. If I go back here and refresh, well, I see it in there, but the value does not exist in the selection list, which means it's not in the dropdown. And you get the same warning in the dropdown. So the idea behind this is just to let you know you can select things that exist in the dropdown, but be careful how you set this because you could accidentally add something that does not exist in there. And then, content author may go in there and say, hey, what is this? What's going on? Oh, man, I'm freaking out. Just, make sure you test your stuff, make sure things are working properly, and make sure you know what's in this before you start adding these, values to these drop list fields. Let's talk about the multi-list field. So the multi-list field is basically composed of two boxes with things that you can select from. By default, if there's nothing selected, you would see something like this. So these are the values that you can select from. Just like the other field, you can actually give it a folder, or you can also do a Sitecore query, which I'll talk about later. You can say, I want those items to show up in here for the content authors or editors to select from. If I go back here, you can do a select all, or you can do a deselect all, and you can go crazy with this like that. I'm going to save this guy. And to read this guy, there actually is code for this because there's no renderer for it. So I create a controller, and this is probably the most complicated controller we're going to see today. So I'm setting some constants up here for IDs I'm going to use throughout this class. Also, I need an instance of my master database. I forget why, but it's in here somewhere. So what am I doing? I'm actually grabbing the field and I'm implicitly casting it as a multi-list field instance. So this is a class that has a lot of stuff on it. So we have a look at this quickly. You know, you can do a contains, you can see what's inside of it, things like that. This is only going to give you, when it says string item, that actually means the item ID. You probably will never really have to use this, but I don't think I've ever used the contains method. It's there. There's all kinds of other methods here. This is probably the one you would use if you ever had to grab items, you know, from code. Get items. So that will give you, well, the items of the, you know, items that are selected in the multi-list field. There are other things in here. Items actually will give you the item IDs. It's just a string array that's on this class instance. And then there are other things as well. Things I'm not going to talk about, but this, you know, things like that. Target IDs, item IDs, things like that. Value, obviously you could use that to save values in this thing. So let's go over here, get models. We're basically just creating instances of skinny models based off of items that we grab from the multi-list. And then we're basically just creating those and adding them to a list, and I'm putting it in the model, and then I'm returning it, and then returning it over to the eraser view. So if I go over here and run this guy, here's the raw value. So it's actually a bunch of IDs delimited by pipes. And then, you know, behind the scenes, the multi-list field helper class will kind of govern all this stuff for you. You can get the items from it using get items. And then here I have my skinny items just iterating over stuff that was selected in the multi-list field. So let's talk about modifying things in this thing. So I have a action called add item. So I'm going to add my home page to it, this guy. So I'm getting an instance and making sure it's on no, because let's say somebody changed this inside of Sitecore. You know, you got to make sure, you know, because people can change things in Sitecore and it might break things. You want to make sure your code doesn't explode. I'm going to shut off the security model, put the item in rendering, and then I'm going to actually add this ID to it. And then basically that's going to append this with a pipe to the last item that was selected in there. You can also, if you wanted to be crazy, you can prepend it, but I'm not going to talk about that. And then I'm just doing the same stuff. I'm just passing off the multi-list field to get a model that has a bunch of skinny items on it, and then passing it back to the same eraser view. So let's run that and see what happens. There we go. We have home as the bottom item selected. All the other stuff is the same, except for this up here. The item ID of home page is over at the very right, which I'm not going to go look at. If I go back here, we see that home is selected, but you get a warning. It's not in the selections list because it wasn't selected from over here. It doesn't meet the definition of the query that's on the source. That's another thing I wanted to show you. Be careful of what you put in here because you could get things like this, and people will be like, oh my God, how did that get in there? So just, you know, be very cognizant of what you add to these. Likewise, you can do a remove operation on these. So if we go look at that code, I'm going to delete an item from here. I cheated and grabbed an item ID from one of those items that's selected. I don't remember which item it was, so I just said some item, stored that GUID in the string. Just like, you know, kind of similar, you have to put the, you got to make sure it's on now, shut off the security model, put the item in editing mode, and then you can do a dot remove, and that will remove the item ID from the list if it exists. And then you should take the item out of editing mode. So let's go run that. I forget which one it is, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4 guys in here. We should only see 3 after we run this. There we go. We only have 3. We only have 3 GUIDs up here. If we go back and do a refresh, well, it looks like it was the last guy. And look at, he's over in the left-hand side now because he was deselected via code right there. So that's the multi-list field. going to talk about the name value list field, which I like because it's kind of cool. I'm going to say all the fields are cool, but I like this one a lot. This is basically a key value peer field. So you see, things over here. This would be like a key. This would be the value, and I can add to it. I don't know. Hi, there. You could just keep adding, and it just auto-magically adds stuff at the end. I'm not going to save that guy. No. So over here, there's no renderer for this. So if I would spit out the raw value, you would see something that looks like a query string. Because it is a query string. So basically that's how this the field value for this gets saved. It's a query string, essentially. And it even will do a URL encode on it for the values. So you get nice. You can actually throw this on a URL if you wanted to, if there's some kind of requirement that you have for that. So if I go look at the code that actually reads this, I created a controller for this. So there is a field class helper here. Well, I probably shouldn't call it a helper. It's a field class that wraps this field. It has some stuff on it that you can actually use. All these methods, and then you can grab the inner field, which is just a field instance. And then it has a name value collection on it called name values. So this is how you get the key values out of it, which I'm doing actually in this get model method. Just making sure nothing's no. If it is, return no. Otherwise, I created a model that has a name value collection on it. Just going to go here just to show you I'm not lying. We have that guy there. I'm just going to iterate over this thing inside of the razor view. So we grab it, we give it to this razor view, which I'm going to show you that code right now. Just like the other ones, I'm going to show you the raw value. Obviously, we need to do some checks and balances, make sure nothing's no. Show the raw value. And then I'm going to iterate over all the keys in that name value collection. I'm going to output the key as the name, and then the value. Now here, I'm actually doing a URL decode so that we can actually view this as what you would expect it to look like if you're in the content editor, not looking at raw values. So if I go over to the read and I run this guy, there we go. So here's the raw value. CMS, Sitecore, name, version, and this is what was saved in the field. Language C#, database SQL Server 2014. So that's what we have here. Now if we wanted to modify this guy, let's go over to the controller action for that. I'm going to use the same field class. Make sure it's not null. Shut off security. I'm grabbing the instance of the name value collection and putting it in this temporary variable right here. And then I'm adding a new key value pair to it. Then I'm going to put the item in editing mode and then set the name value collection with the collection that I modified. Then take the item out of editing mode. And then I'm calling the same method to grab the model for this particular controller rendering so that we have an updated view of what's going on. So if I actually run this guy, preview, you can see we have our new key value pair here added. Here's what was saved in the field. If I do a refresh and go look at this guy, we can see that the key value pair were added here. And obviously they were added as, let me go look at this guy. Ooh, I think I discovered a bug in here. Anyways, at the end, it was added to the query string. All right, so those are all the list field types I wanted to cover today. So let's talk about some item-related API stuff. So, in Sitecore, you have the ability to pretty much do anything you want. You can create items in code. You can delete them, modify them. You can even move them around, which I'm not going to show. you could do some really cool things if you had to. You have full power over Sitecore, that you see here via the API. Everything is there. Sometimes it's going to take some discovery by decompiling DLLs. Sometimes you'll find things on people's blog posts, or you might even learn something from somebody on the Sitecore community Slack, which I recommend joining if you're not on. So let's go look at how we create an item. So we need a controller for this, because there's no magical stuff on the front end to make this work. Let me shut this guy down, put this guy over here. All right, so I'm going to create an item using this action here. So I have some things predefined up here. This is a template ID to the template I'm using for these guys like this. The guys with the red icon. So, and then I have a path to where I want this item to live that I'm going to create, which is actually over here is going to be this folder, the item. I probably should have called them the item container or the something else, but I called it the item. And then I'm going to give my new item name. I'm going to call it test item. So here I'm going to grab the parent item. So I'm using the master database directly here, which I said never, ever, ever do this, but I'm doing it here. Grabbing the parent, which is going to be this folder here. And then I'm shutting off the security model. I don't have to put anything in editing mode because we don't have an item yet. So all I'm going to do is I'm actually going to call the add method on the parent, pass in the name of the item, and then the template, or template ID. Then magically, if things work, we should get an item back. I do recommend putting this in a try-catch, which I didn't do here because I was a bad developer, but I do, it's highly suggested and definitely log your errors if there are problems. I'm going to return an empty result because there's really nothing to display. We're just adding things inside of Sitecore using this controller action. So let's go run that. Create item. Come on, Sitecore, wake up. If I go in preview, nothing was outputted because we returned an empty result. If I go in here and do a refresh, we have our test item. Let's click on this guy. Come on, wake up. I have some fields on this. So we have a date time field, which I didn't discuss, but I'm going to show you how to do things with date time. And then we have a single line text box on here for title. So over in the modify, we're going to add values into here. So if I go back to code real quickly, I have something for modify item, which is an action for this controller. I'm actually grabbing the path of that new item, which is obviously the concatenation of the parent path with a / and then the actual item name. This is a way to do a query in Sitecore to grab an item. I'm actually going to grab that. Make sure he's not null. Shut off security, and then I'm going to put him into editing mode like I did in the other fields. I'm going to set his title field to be hello, and then his date time field to be date time now. But I need to call the Sitecore date utility class method in order to save it properly, and I'll show you why. So let's run this to see what happens. Nothing displays. If we go back here, do a refresh. Oh, it's Sitecore, wake up. Oh, I'm on the wrong item. Go down here. So we put hello in there, and then we put the timestamp of date time now when the code ran. Now, why did I have to use that date utility class? Because date and date time fields in Sitecore are using ISO dates. It's formatted like that. It looks a little strange, but that's how it was done, basically for consistency and standardization. So if you take a date time object from, let's say, the system namespace in .NET, don't do a toString and put it in here because it won't work. You need to use the date time utility, which I believe is I forget what namespace. Let's have a look real quickly. It's in the Sitecore namespace right in the root. Definitely use this in order to save date-time object values inside date-time fields or date fields in Sitecore. So we created the item, we modified it. Let's delete it. I'm not happy with this item anymore. Let's throw it away. All right, so we have code to do that. So I'm going to actually generate the path using this parent in the name of the item, separated by a /. Grabbing the item from Sitecore from the master database instance. If it's not now, shut off the security model, put the item in editing mode, then do item.delete. And then take it out of editing mode. I don't even know if you have to take it out of editing mode. Or even put it in editing mode. I think you do in order for it to not explode. But that's there. And if we run this guy, I think you don't need to do editing mode when you're deleting. I think you just need to shut off the security model. So that code here, this guy and this guy right here is superfluous. You don't need it, but it doesn't break. It doesn't hurt. I just did it. You don't need it though. Anyways, if we go and run this guy, and then we go refresh this guy, he's gone. You might be thinking, oh Mike, I totally got rid of the item forever. Well, that's not really true. If you have, there's a setting in your Sitecore configuration to say, hey, I want items that get deleted to go into the recycle bin. If you have that turned on, then it will end up in the recycle bin. So if I actually go look in my recycle bin, I'll see that this guy's here, and if I wanted to, I can restore him and put him back. So if I go and refresh, there he is. But, I'll leave this guy here for now. Let's talk about queries. Let's first talk about the Sitecore query. So, my content editor is going slow. If a Sitecore query is something, let's go look at code real quickly. I'm not going to run it right now, but let's look at it first. So we already saw an instance of a query that I was running where I was calling on get item. That's an instance of a query. But you also can do things like select items or select single item off of the database instance that takes in a query. So I can do select single item, and he wants a query. Now a Sitecore query could look like this. In this instance here, I'm going to do it on select items. So you have those two different methods. I'm going to jump out of this file real quickly because I want to show another instance of how to set this. And then we'll talk about this code when we're done with that. So if I go over to this guy, here's where you can also use a Sitecore query. In the source field of multiple field types. Here you want to put query if it's a complex query. So let me take this out and show you what this looks like. I'm going to actually move this into Sublime. And don't judge me, I have a lot of tabs open and I need to close them. So what am I doing here? So this is an XPath query, or yeah, I'm going to say Sitecore's flavor of XPath. I'm starting at the Sitecore node at the very top of my tree, and I'm doing whack whack, which means grab everything underneath it, all the way down to the leaves. Any item, which means this guy here, that has a template name of folder, or it has a template name of rendering folder. So, a rendering folder would be folders that are inside of, basically in your renderings area here. So these would be rendering folders here. That's a rendering folder. So if I go back here and we see that, I want to see, so that's going to get, all these guys are going to get pulled into this multi-list field. Alternatively, there's another type of query in Sitecore which is called a fast query, which, I hate to say it as a misnomer because it, it's not always fast. So, but we're giving it the same query. The difference between query and fast query, if I remember right, is that fast query hits the database directly, whereas the regular Sitecore query looks at the Sitecore item cache. So Sitecore will cache items that you see in your content tree in memory. The fast query will bypass that and go directly to the database. This particular query, the regular Sitecore query is limited by a configuration setting inside of your Sitecore configuration. So I go over here. By the way, this is a utility that comes with Sitecore out of the box, show config. It will show you all the configuration settings in your instance at any given, well, at this given second. So if I go look at max items, that's not the one I wanted, this one. Max items is the maximum number of items that a Sitecore query will return. In my instance, it's set to 260. I don't know if this is out of the box now, because I actually was surprised when I discovered this earlier, because it used to always be set at 100, as far back as I remember since I started in Sitecore. But this is set at 260. So if I run a query in Sitecore that's going to have, let's say, 500 items, I'm only going to get 260 back if I use a regular Sitecore query. Fast query will ignore this and will return everything. So those are some differences between the two different queries. I also use fast query, I have fast query in here. If we go back and look at, an item that has these two multi-list fields on them, we see over, this is a Sitecore query one. You can see there are a bunch of stuff and a bunch of items that are in here that you can select. Now if I go down, so if you actually look at this real quickly, and this will give you an indication that they're different. Look at all these action items. So these are folders of some sort. If I go down to this guy, he has a lot more action folders. As a matter of fact, he has a lot more of everything. There's a lot of stuff in here. I'm scrolling and I'm scrolling. My finger's tired now. But there's stuff in here. So if I go and look at, let's look at this code real quickly that we're going to run. So up in this action of this controller, we're going to do a basic Sitecore query. That's what we have here. I'm using a stopwatch instance that's in .NET to just time to see how fast both of these are, and we'll compare them together. I'm going to do a start, and then I'm going to select those items using that query from the master database. I'm going to throw these guys into some kind of collection. Then I'm going to stop the stopwatch. And then I'm going to pass it off to this method here. That basically, just make sure nothing's null, we have items, all that good stuff. And then we're going to actually create skinny item instances from these items. Add it to a collection, put it inside some kind of model where that will hold how long the query took in milliseconds, how many items do we have, and then the items surrender. Likewise, the fast query controller action does the same thing, except we're using a fast query, which is indicated by fast colon. When you're doing fast queries in C#, you need to prefix this onto your query. For a Sitecore query, you don't really need that. However, over in the content editor, this is where it gets confusing. You do need that stuff. So like I showed you, if I go back, we need to actually prefix a query for a Sitecore query. This is where it gets weird. Because really what's going on is we're telling the field that we're giving you a query. Same thing here, we're giving you another query, but it's a fast query. So it looks like we have, query, colon, something, colon, blah, 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 colon. But really, no. Basically, this is almost like what you'd see in the C# code, except, we need to let the field know that it's actually a query, and that's, you can ignore that in C#. It's not needed. So we saw the code, and let's go over and just look at the Razor view real quickly. Nothing really magical in it. Both of these guys have the same code in them. If we have no model or there are no items, we just give a sad face saying, oh, we have nothing to show, and then we get out. Otherwise, we show some statistics. So how long did the query take in milliseconds? How many items do we have? Let's iterate over all the items and show them using the skinny item model that we have. Likewise, Sitecore Query Razor is the same code. I did a copy and paste job. So if we run this, let's run them both. Well, let's run one first, just so we don't cause a hiccup in the system if the database is overloaded or whatever. Because let's say an item, from the Sitecore query is not in the item cache, it's going to hit the database, then put it in the cache, then return it. So let's do Sitecore Query first. Shut this off. So as we can see, the Sitecore Query took 473 milliseconds to execute. In this given instance, we only have 260 items returned, which is the max item value in your Sitecore configuration. So if we go run this for a fast query, and I'm going to leave this window open so we can compare. Spinning and spinning and spinning. Look at that. He took a lot longer, didn't he? Compared to 473. 3,995 milliseconds to execute. However, he returned back 375 items. Here's all the items. So fast query doesn't mean it's always fast. And I remember, I don't know who said this, it might have been Alex Shiva way back in the day when fast query came out. I think fast query is performant at a certain amount of items, but I don't remember what that number was because that was a long time ago. But, so the moral of this story is if you need to get more than the max items setting, you'd want to use a fast query. Otherwise, stick with just basic Sitecore query because it's a lot faster typically. And the other thing to just note is, I don't know if this is still true today, but I remember seeing, way back in the day, and it doesn't look like it's true here, but when I would use a fast query as a source for a field, these items would sometimes be out of order. They wouldn't be in alphabetical order. They'd be in some other order or random order. But it looks like that's not true anymore, but I don't know if that's true. But anyways, so that covers what I wanted to cover today.
Woohoo, are you sure?
I think so. I think that's all we had, right?
Yeah, that's all we had. Let me just change it back.
Unless you have some stuff up your sleeve that you're willing to share.
No, not at this moment. All right, let me get back here. All right, so Mike went through his magic, and that's pretty much what we have today. I know we went over it a little bit, but I think this was kind of very important. You need to know about your fields, what you can do with them. You can definitely experiment with them a lot more in your own time. And that's the basis of pretty much any of your Sitecore solutions, and you'll only get better the more you use it, the more you experiment with it. We'll try to give you guys the solution and maybe the serialized items or a package, something like that, so you can play around with this. And also we're trying to record this session. Hopefully the recording works and we can share that recording with you guys, but we'll let you know that shortly as well. Thank you so much for attending our session. We have session 3 coming up next week. Oh, sorry, not next week. Coming up soon, where we're going to talk about serialization and ORM tools which you can use to make your life easy. I mean, for me, it was actually kind of hard going through this, where I had to depend on Mike, asking him to do the demos and do the code, because I haven't really used pure Sitecore API in a long, long time. I pretty much use an ORM. I have no need to directly use a Sitecore API, but that's not an excuse.
Neither have I. So.
Yeah. So it'll be an interesting session. So we'll have some information about Unicorn as well as TDS for serialization as well as Sitecore serialization. On top of that, we'll try to give you an overview of ORMs, wrappers, and mappers. So synthesis and Glass for you to get an idea. We'll try to see if we can get in touch with the Fortis guy to see if we can have that demoed as well. Yeah. So thank you so much for attending. Mike, do you have anything else you would like?
Don't forget to show the last slide.
This is the last slide, isn't it?
No, there's one more slide.
No, there isn't.
Yeah, there's another slide.
This is it.
I see the query slide.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
No, I'm on the thanks slide with the guy's ball.
Maybe it froze me.
Wait. What about that? Can you see it now?
Yeah, I see it. It's on animating, but I don't know.
The guy.
There we go.
Okay.
All right, I had to show that.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for attending. Keep an eye out on the social networks for the next session coming up shortly. All right,
All
have a
right.
good
Thanks,
night.
guys.
Bye. Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye.